I never thought I'd be embroiled in what amounted to suburban warfare over something as innocent as a fishing rod and a quiet afternoon, but here we are. It all started with a 5-0 piece of paper that landed in my mailbox. A fine so ludicrous it felt like a prank. $5,000 for attempting to teach my 7-year-old son, Leo, how to cast a line into the tranquil waters of Whispering Pines Lake. The very lake our realtor had practically sung odes to when we bought our house. How did I get here? Good question. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll tell you exactly how this spiraled into the craziest legal battle of my life. Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious. It all began because apparently that serene body of water was not for the likes of us common folk. It was the exclusive domain of the Whispering Pines Lakefront Estates Esteemed Members Club. A grand title for what I would soon discover was little more than a petty fiefdom run by a woman who wore pastel tracksuits like royal decrees. We'd moved into Whispering Pines Estates about 6 months prior. My wife Sarah and I were looking for a place with a bit more green space for Leo, a neighborhood that felt safe, a community. I'm a civil engineer, and Sarah's a graphic designer. We're not rabble-rousers. We're the kind of people who sort our recycling meticulously and bring cookies to new neighbors. Whispering Pines, with its tree-lined streets and the aforementioned lake shimmering at its heart, seemed perfect. The lake was a big draw. The promotional materials for the development showed families picnicking, kids skipping stones, no asterisk, no exclusive access only disclaimer that we could see. So, one sunny Saturday, Leo buzzing with excitement clutching his new Spider-Man fishing rod, we strolled down to the lake. There were a couple of other families there, a few kids on paddle boards, the picture of suburban bliss. We found a quiet spot, and I was explaining the delicate art of not hooking your own ear when a golf cart, emblazoned with a small, almost apologetic HOA logo, trundled up. The man inside, a retiree named Gary, who usually watered the communal flower beds, looked uncomfortable. "Morning, folks," he mumbled. "Just, you folks members of the Lake Club?" I smiled. "Morning, Gary. No, didn't know there was one. Just teaching the little guy here about patience, mostly." Gary winced. "Ah, well, see, the thing is, fishing's, restricted. For members." "President Snodgrass is pretty strict about it." President Snodgrass. The name was new to me, but it already had a certain ominous ring to it. I figured, okay, a misunderstanding. "Oh, right. Is there a fee to join, or something we missed in the welcome packet?" Gary looked even more pained. "It's complicated. Maybe just best not to fish today, eh? Don't want to cause any trouble." Fair enough, I thought. We weren't looking for trouble. "No problem, Gary. Thanks for the heads up." We packed up Leo's tiny tackle box, his face a mask of disappointment that just about broke my heart. I promised him we'd figure it out. The following Monday, the letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead. Stark black print on heavy cream paper that probably cost more per sheet than my first car. A 5-0 fine for unauthorized use of exclusive recreational asset, Whispering Pines Lake, fishing violation. My coffee nearly ended up on the ceiling. $5,000? For almost fishing? I marched straight to the HOA office, which was a surprisingly plush little annex attached to the community clubhouse. And that's when I met her, President Brenda Snodgrass. She was, to put it mildly, a vision. Platinum blonde hair sculpted into a helmet impervious to wind or reason, a turquoise velour tracksuit that screamed leisurely but in charge, and enough gold jewelry to fund a small private security force. She was perched behind an imposing mahogany desk, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if they held the secrets of the universe. She didn't look up when I entered. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Tiffany, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, announced me. Brenda Snodgrass finally graced me with her attention, her gaze sweeping over me with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something you'd scrape off your shoe. "Yes?" she said, her voice smooth but with an undercurrent of, "How dare you breathe my air?" I placed the letter on her desk. "Brenda," I began, aiming for calm and reasonable. There has to be some mistake. We were told not to fish, so we didn't. And $5,000? That's not a fine. That's extortion. She picked up the letter, not by touching it directly, but by nudging it with a gold pen. It's President Snodgrass, she corrected, her eyes narrowing. And there is no mistake, Mr. Miller, Mark Miller. And President Snodgrass. We barely had a line in the water before Gary approached us. We complied immediately. She gave a small, dismissive laugh. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse, Mr. Miller. The lake is for members of the Whispering Pines Lakefront Estates Esteemed Members Club, a club you are clearly not a part of. The fee for membership is substantial, and there's a waiting list. Her smile was thin and reptilian. The fine stands. We take unauthorized enjoyment of our prime amenities very seriously. It dilutes the experience for our paying members. I felt a surge of incredulity. Your paying members? What about the rest of the homeowners who bought here thinking the lake was a community feature, as advertised? Does the HOA even own this lake outright, to restrict it so severely? That was the first time I saw a flicker of something other than condescending superiority in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a harder edge. The HOA manages all common areas, Mr. Miller. And this lake is our most exclusive common area. My board and I have worked tirelessly to maintain its prestige. People pay a premium to live here, expecting a certain standard, a certain exclusivity. We don't allow just anyone to clutter up the shoreline. The sheer arrogance was stunning. So, what makes these esteemed members so special? I asked, my voice getting a little tighter. Their willingness to contribute to its upkeep, Mr. Miller. Substantially, she said, tapping the fine letter again with her pen. Pay the fine, and perhaps in a few years, if a spot opens up and your profile fits, you might be considered for membership. The implication was clear. We weren't good enough. My engineering background, my wife's successful design business, our quiet, responsible lives, none of it mattered. We hadn't kissed the ring. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle. It was about the sheer, unadulterated gall. I won't be paying this fine, President Snodgrass, I said, my voice low but firm. And I'll be looking into the legality of this esteemed members club and your HOA's claim over access to that lake. For the first time, she actually leaned forward. The turquoise velour strained slightly. Is that a threat, Mr. Miller? She purred. It's a promise, President Snodgrass, I replied, picking up the fine letter. I'm an engineer. I deal with facts, with plans, with established boundaries, and something about this whole situation feels decidedly out of bounds. As I walked out, Tiffany gave me a wide-eyed, almost sympathetic look. President Snodgrass was already back to examining her nails, dismissing me from her diamond-encrusted reality. The battle lines had been drawn, right there in her opulent, taxpayer-funded office. And as I walked home, past the shimmering, beautiful, and apparently forbidden lake, a new kind of determination began to solidify. Brenda Snodgrass had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought I was just another compliant little homeowner. She was about to find out how wrong she was. My initial fury began to coalesce into a cold, analytical resolve. This wasn't just a neighborhood spat. It was an abuse of power, and I was going to dissect it piece by piece. The first thing I did when I got home was pull out every piece of paper related to our house purchase, the deed, the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC rupees. The original development plans I'd managed to find online during our due diligence. Hours turned into days as I cross-referenced clauses, searched county databases for property records, and tried to trace the lineage of Whispering Pines Lake. The HOA documents were a masterpiece of vague legalese. They spoke of common areas managed by the HOA, but the lake itself was never explicitly deeded to the HOA in any clear, unambiguous language I could find. There were references to maintaining recreational amenities, but nothing granting them the power to create an exclusive, high-fee club for something that, on the surface, appeared to be a community asset for all residents. President Snodgrass, meanwhile, seemed to take my quiet defiance as a personal affront. Within a week, new signs appeared around the lake, larger and more aggressive than before. Private property, members of the WPLEEMC only. Violators will be prosecuted and fined to the fullest extent of HOA policy. The acronym was almost as long as the warning itself. Then came another letter, this time a second notice, delinquent fine, with an added $500 late fee. Brenda was doubling down. I also started getting little, friendly reminders about other, suddenly critical HOA rules. A polite but firm note about my trash cans being visible from the street for 2 hours too long on collection day. A passive-aggressive email questioning the exact shade of beige of our new window shutters, wondering if it was an HOA-approved beige. It was classic harassment, designed to intimidate and wear me down. But with each petty volley, my resolve only hardened. Sarah, bless her heart, was worried. "Mark, are you sure about this? She seems vindictive." "She is," I agreed, highlighting a particularly convoluted section of the CC rupees. "But she's also sloppy. There are holes here. Big ones." My weekends were no longer spent on home improvement projects or leisurely bike rides. Instead, I was deep in the county assessor's online portal, pulling up plat maps dating back to the original development of Whispering Pines in the late 1970s. The maps showed Lot A, Lot B, Lot C, and then a large, irregularly shaped parcel designated reserved for future recreational development, developer responsibility. This was the lake. I traced the developer, Pinnacle Homes, Inc. A quick search showed they'd gone bankrupt in the early 90s, their assets sold off or absorbed by various entities. But who got the lake? That was the multi-$1,000 question, or, in my case, the potential $5,000 fine plus whatever else Brenda could dream up question. During one of my late-night research sessions, fueled by lukewarm coffee and righteous indignation, I found a reference to the original water rights for the creek that fed Whispering Pines Lake. These rights, it turned out, were attached to the land parcel itself, not to any surrounding homeowners association by default. This was interesting. The chain of title for that specific recreational development parcel was a mess. It seemed to have been passed around in a series of quick sales among shell corporations after Pinnacle Homes dissolved, almost as if no one quite knew what to do with a man-made lake that wasn't directly attached to profitable housing lots anymore. I talked to a few neighbors, very discreetly. Most were terrified of President Snodgrass and her board. "She's been president for 10 years, one whispered over his fence, eyes darting around. "Runs this place like her own little kingdom. The lake club fees? Nobody knows where that money really goes. Probably her tracksuit fund." He mentioned a few older residents who might remember more about the lake's early days. One such resident was a sweet old lady named Mrs. Gable, who'd lived in Whispering Pines since it was first built. I approached her cautiously, bringing a small pot of chrysanthemums as a peace offering. "The lake?" she'd mused, her eyes twinkling. "Oh dear, that lake has always been a bit of a contention. When old Mr. Henderson from Pinnacle Homes built it, he always said it was for everyone in Whispering Pines. He used to stock it with fish himself. After Pinnacle went bust, well, things got muddled. The first HOA board tried to claim it, but I don't think they ever really got the papers straight." Mrs. Gable's information, while anecdotal, was a valuable breadcrumb. It suggested that the HOA's ironclad claim might be more rust than iron. President Snodgrass's esteemed members club was looking more and more like a carefully constructed illusion, a way to monetize an asset they didn't unequivocally own. The original 5-0 fine letter was now framed and sitting on my desk, a constant reminder of Brenda's audacity. I also started to look into the esteemed members club itself. I casually asked Tiffany at the HOA office for a list of members or the club's charter, feigning a potential interest in joining if my financial situation improved. She blushed and stammered that such information was confidential, and President Snodgrass handles all club matters. Personally, the secrecy was another red flag. If this club was legitimate, why the clandestine operations? Why the lack of transparency? The fines kept coming, now with added interest and increasingly threatening legal jargon, likely drafted by Brenda herself over a mimosa. They even sent a notice about putting a lien on my house if the debt wasn't settled. The pressure was mounting, exactly as they intended. But they were underestimating me. They saw a disgruntled homeowner. I was becoming a forensic investigator of suburban bylaws. My big break came not from an ancient deed or a forgotten county record, but from a chat with a disgruntled former HOA board member. Let's call him Dave. Dave had served one miserable term under President Snodgrass before fleeing, metaphorically speaking, for the hills, or at least for a neighborhood with a less imperial HOA president. I tracked him down through a mutual acquaintance who also had Brenda stories. Dave was initially reluctant to talk, still bearing the psychic scars of Snodgrass's reign. But after I explained my situation and the outrageous 5-0 fine, he opened up, fueled by 2 beers and the lingering taste of injustice. Brenda's Lake Club, Dave snorted, is the biggest scam she ever pulled. Look, the HOA maintains the area around the lake, mowing, a bit of landscaping. That's covered by our regular dues. But the lake itself? The water? The land underneath it? Always murky. Brenda just started calling it exclusive one day, printed up some fancy brochures for her esteemed members club, and started charging exorbitant membership fees to her inner circle. Mostly her fellow board members and a few well-off cronies who liked the idea of having a private lake they didn't actually have to pay to own. This was gold. He explained that the club fees, rumored to be several $1,000s a year per member family, went into a separate HOA account that Brenda controlled with an iron fist and very little oversight. We asked for an audit once, Dave said, shaking his head. She accused us of undermining community harmony and somehow got 2 of the guys who asked kicked off the finance committee. He didn't know for sure who legally owned the lake parcel itself, but he knew the HOA's claim was built on bravado and bullying, not bedrock legal standing. She's terrified of anyone really digging into it, Dave concluded. That's why she's hitting you so hard with those fines. She wants to make an example out of you, shut you down before you find the truth. Dave's testimony, while not legal proof, pointed me in the right direction. The key wasn't just that the HOA didn't own it. It was who did. I redoubled my efforts, focusing on the chain of title for that specific, reserved for future recreational development parcel after Pinnacle Homes' bankruptcy. It was a tangled web, passed through various holding companies. I spent an entire Saturday at the county records office, going through dusty microfiche archives that probably hadn't been touched in decades. The clerks were initially bemused by my intensity, then vaguely helpful as they saw I wasn't just some crackpot. And then, late in the afternoon, amidst the scent of old paper and fading ink, I found it. The smoking gun. The specific parcel of land comprising the lake bed and a significant portion of the immediate shoreline had, after Pinnacle's bankruptcy and a series of subsequent non-payments of property taxes by intermediary shell companies that likely never even knew they owned a lake, eventually reverted to the county. Standard procedure for tax-delinquent properties. And then, even more astonishingly, the county, seeing no direct public use for this somewhat awkwardly landlocked man-made lake, had put it up for auction about 5 years ago as surplus land. Not a high-profile auction. A small notice, probably buried in the legal section of the local paper. And who bought it? A small, out-of-state LLC I'd never heard of. Aquavest Holdings, LLC. My heart hammered. I quickly searched for Aquavest Holdings. They were a tiny company, seemingly specializing in acquiring odd or underutilized water-related properties, small ponds, unused reservoirs, things like that, likely for minimal investment, hoping they'd appreciate or someone would eventually want to buy them for development or conservation. They probably had no idea about the fierce suburban drama unfolding around their dormant asset. The implications hit me like a rogue wave. The HOA did not own the lake. Brenda Snodgrass's esteemed members club, was operating on land they had absolutely no legal right to control, let alone charge fees for or restrict access to. They were, in effect, trespassing on Aquavest's property, and by fining me, they were trying to enforce rules for a property they didn't own against someone who was, technically, just as entitled, or unentitled, to be there as their esteemed members. A slow, predatory grin spread across my face. The 5-0 fine suddenly seemed very, very small. My next step was to contact Aquavest Holdings LLC. Finding a direct contact wasn't easy. They were clearly structured for minimal public interface. But my engineering background involved tracing obscure stakeholders for infrastructure projects, so I had a few tricks up my sleeve. After a few days of determined digital sleuthing, I found a managing partner, a Mr. Alistair Finch, based several states away. I drafted a careful email, introducing myself as a resident of Whispering Pines, outlining the situation with the HOA's unauthorized use of and profiting from their property, Whispering Pines Lake, and expressing a potential interest in discussing the future of the parcel. I didn't reveal my full hand yet. I just wanted to see if they were even aware of what was happening on their land. Mr. Finch replied within 24 hours. His email was brief and to the point. Mr. Miller, your information is intriguing. We were under the impression the property was largely undeveloped and dormant. We would indeed be interested in discussing its future. Are you perhaps representing a consortium of local residents? I replied that, for now, I was representing my own interest in seeing the situation resolved equitably, and perhaps in exploring an acquisition. That last part was a leap, a sudden, audacious idea that had just popped into my head. If they didn't care much about the lake, maybe I could care about it enough to buy it. The thought was exhilarating. Imagine Brenda Snodgrass's face. I arranged a phone call with Alistair Finch. He was a shrewd but surprisingly reasonable businessman. He confirmed Aquavest had bought the lake parcel for a relatively low sum at a tax auction, seeing it as a long-term hold with minimal carrying costs. He was completely unaware of the HOA's activities, the esteemed members club, or the aggressive enforcement. They're charging fees to use our land? He'd asked, a note of astonished amusement in his voice. And fining people? Good heavens, that's rather bold. He admitted they had no local presence or immediate plans for the lake. Their business model was to acquire such properties and wait. Frankly, Mr. Miller, Finch said, it sounds like more trouble than it's worth to us if there's an HOA behaving like a rogue state. If you have a serious proposal for acquisition, we'd certainly be willing to entertain it. It would save us a headache. My pulse quickened. I might just have a serious proposal, Mr. Finch. We talked numbers. The price he quoted was significant. More than I had readily available in my checking account, that's for sure. But it wasn't astronomical. It was doable, especially if Sarah was on board, and we restructured some investments. The sheer, glorious, checkmate potential of owning Brenda Snodgrass's precious lake was almost intoxicating. I discussed it with Sarah that night. I laid out all my research, the fines, Brenda's tyranny, Dave's intel, the discovery of Aquavest, and finally, the audacious plan, buy the lake. She listened patiently, her expression shifting from worried to incredulous to, finally, a look I recognized, the one she got when she was about to dive into a complex design project with gusto. Mark, she said slowly, a smile playing on her lips, that is the most beautifully devious, perfectly engineered plan I have ever heard. It's insane. It's brilliant. How much do we need? With Sarah on board, the plan shifted into high gear. We talked to our financial advisor, moved some assets around. It was a gamble, a significant investment, purely to make a point, albeit a very, very satisfying point. I engaged a local real estate lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, who specialized in unusual property transactions. She reviewed Aquavest's title. It was clear. She was initially taken aback by my plan. You want to buy a lake to get back at your HOA president? But when I laid out the history of fines and harassment, she grinned. Okay, I'm in. This is better than litigation. This is poetry. The negotiations with Alistair Finch were straightforward. He was happy to offload a property that was suddenly generating nuisance from afar. Within a few weeks, astonishingly quickly for a real estate deal, we had a purchase agreement drawn up. We conducted our due diligence. Water quality tests. Surprisingly good, thanks to years of benign neglect rather than active HOA management. Boundary surveys, confirming the parcel lines encompassed the entire lake and a decent buffer around it. And a final title check. All green. The closing was scheduled. I specifically asked Miss Albright to keep the buyer's name, my name, off any easily searchable public databases until the deed was officially recorded and I had a copy in my hand. I didn't want Brenda getting wind of this prematurely. I needed the element of absolute surprise. Meanwhile, the HOA's pressure campaign continued. Another fine reminder, this one threatening referral to a collection agency. They even had a tow truck slowly cruise past my house one afternoon, a clear intimidation tactic regarding a bogus parking violation I'd also received. Brenda was clearly trying to break me. Little did she know, I was about to own her favorite gilded cage. The day the sale closed and the deed for Whispering Pines Lake, parcel ID 734-9, was officially recorded in my name, I felt a profound sense of triumph. I held the legally certified document in my hands. The crisp paper a stark contrast to Brenda's flimsy, threatening fine notices. Ms. Albright clapped me on the shoulder. Congratulations, Mr. Miller. You are now officially a lake owner. What's your first act as proprietor? A very specific, very expensive idea was already forming. Brenda Snodgrass had a big, annual Lake Club Members Appreciation BBQ scheduled for the following Saturday, right on the prime shoreline of my newly acquired lake. Invitations, printed on the same ostentatious cream cardstock as my fine, had gone out to her esteemed members. I even got one, left conspicuously in my mailbox, with a handwritten note from Brenda. Mr. Miller, while you are of course not eligible to attend as a non-member, I trust this serves as a reminder of what you are missing out on. Perhaps you'll reconsider paying your outstanding obligations. B.S. Oh, I was going to attend. Not as a guest, but as the host's worst nightmare. With the deed to Whispering Pines Lake now securely in my possession, the next phase of my plan began, gathering evidence. Brenda Snodgrass and her esteemed members club were about to learn a very expensive lesson in property rights. For the entire week leading up to their annual Lake Club Members Appreciation BBQ, I became a meticulous documentarian of trespass. Each morning, I'd take a stroll, well within my rights as a neighborhood resident on public paths, but with a very specific observational purpose. I noted every HOA landscaping truck that touched the shoreline of my lake. I photographed HOA-paid workers raking leaves, pruning bushes, and even setting up festive lanterns for the upcoming barbecue, all on my property. I saw esteemed members kayaking, paddleboarding, and fishing, yes, fishing, in what they still blissfully, arrogantly believed was their exclusive domain. Each instance was noted, dated, and time-stamped, with photographic evidence where possible. My engineering mind, accustomed to precision and detailed record-keeping, was in its element. This wasn't just about petty revenge anymore. This was about establishing a clear, undeniable pattern of unauthorized use. My lawyer, Ms. Blank Albright, was invaluable. The clearer the documentation of ongoing trespass after your acquisition, the stronger your position, she advised. We're not just talking about past indiscretions by the HOA anymore. We're talking about current, willful violations against you, the legal owner. She helped me draft a formal notice of trespass and demand for cessation of unauthorized use and remediation of damages, a mouthful, but legally robust. This document would outline my ownership, cite the specific instances of trespassing, and, crucially, include an invoice for their unauthorized use. This is where the $5 million figure came into play. How did we arrive at such a delightfully exorbitant number? It wasn't plucked from thin air. We calculated it based on several factors. A fair market rental value, for exclusive access to a private lake of that size in our area, retroactively applied for a significant period. We argued that their esteemed members club had been profiting from an asset they never owned for years, effectively defrauding actual and potential rightful owners like Aquavest and now me. We added charges for unauthorized commercial activity. Their club was essentially a business operation on private land. Estimated costs for restoration of the shoreline, from their unpermitted alterations, legal fees, and of course, a hefty premium for the sheer flagrancy of their continued trespass even after. Unbeknownst to them, ownership had changed. The $5 million wasn't primarily about collection. It was about shock, awe, and demonstrating the colossal scale of their overreach. It was a number designed to make President Brenda Snodgrass's perfectly coiffed hair stand on end. As Saturday approached, the day of the BBQ, a certain grim excitement filled our house. Sarah was enjoying it immensely. "Think of it as performance art," she said, helping me print out oversized, very official-looking copies of the deed and the trespass notice. Leo, now fully understanding that Daddy was fighting the mean lake lady, drew pictures of me as a superhero vanquishing a dragon wearing a turquoise tracksuit. I even subtly reached out to Dave, the former board member. "You might want to attend the HOA BBQ this Saturday," I told him. "I have a feeling there might be some unexpected new business discussed," he chuckled knowingly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mark." The weather for Saturday was perfect. Sunny, a light breeze, ideal for an outdoor gathering, ideal for a public reckoning. The HOA had spared no expense, from what I could see from my discreet observations. Banners proclaiming Whispering Pines Lake Club, preserving excellence. On my property were strung between trees. A large catering tent was being erected on my property. An inflatable bouncy castle for the kids was being inflated, yes, also on my property. President Snodgrass herself was flitting about like a queen bee, directing her worker drones in her brightest fuchsia tracksuit, no doubt anticipating a day of adulation from her loyal subjects. My plan was simple. I wasn't going to sneak in. I was going to walk in, find Brenda, and hand her the documents just as the party was getting into full swing, in front of as many of her esteemed members as possible. Ms. Albright advised against a dramatic public confrontation that could escalate unpredictably, but she conceded that serving the notice at a moment of maximum HOA visibility would certainly have an impact. "Just try not to get arrested for disturbing her peace," she'd said with a wry smile. I timed my arrival for about an hour after the barbecue was scheduled to start. Enough time for most attendees to arrive, get a drink, and settle in. I dressed neatly, not in a suit, but in a way that conveyed quiet, serious business. A collared shirt, clean chinos. I carried a sturdy leather briefcase containing my ammunition, the notarized deed, multiple copies of the trespass notice, with its itemized multi-million-dollar invoice, and a small, high-resolution digital voice recorder just in case. As I walked down the path towards the lake, the sounds of manufactured merriment grew louder. Music, laughter, the squeals of children in the bouncy castle. My heart was steady. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It was about reclaiming a community asset from a petty tyrant, even if, for now, I was that asset's owner. I saw Brenda holding court near the lavish food spread, a plastic champagne flute in one hand, gesticulating animatedly with the other, to a group of fawning members, all dressed in their weekend best, radiating smug exclusivity. She was in her element, the sun glinting off her gold chains. This was her kingdom. She hadn't noticed my approach. I walked directly towards her, my expression neutral. One of her board cronies, a portly man named Gerald, who always looked like he'd just finished a large lunch, saw me first. His smile faltered. "Miller, what are you doing here? This is a private event." Brenda turned her eyes like polished turquoise stones, fixing on me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, undiluted irritation. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping ice, "I believe my note was quite clear. You are not welcome. This is for members only. The surrounding conversation died down as people nearby sensed a confrontation. Perfect. Actually, President Snodgrass, I said, my voice calm but carrying clearly over the sudden lull. We need to discuss the fact that this entire event, and indeed your esteemed members club, is currently operating on private property. Specifically, my private property. I reached into my briefcase. President Brenda Snodgrass stared at me, as if I'd just sprouted a second head that was singing opera. Her fuchsia tracksuit suddenly seemed to glow with indignation. Your private property? She scoffed, a harsh laugh escaping her. Mr. Miller, are you delusional? This is Whispering Pines Lake, the crown jewel of our HOA, managed exclusively for our esteemed members. Security. She actually called for security, though the only security present was Gary, the retiree, who was currently manning the hot dog stand and looked like he fervently wished the earth would swallow him whole. A few of her bored acolytes, including the portly Gerald, puffed up slightly, ready to do, well, probably nothing more than glare menacingly. The crowd of esteemed members had gone quiet, their cheerful chatter replaced by intrigued murmurs. This was better than the hired banjo player. I assure you, President Snodgrass, I am quite lucid, I replied, maintaining my calm demeanor. I pulled out the certified copy of the deed. As of Tuesday, last 10:32 a.m., I, Mark Miller, became the sole legal owner of parcel ID 734 Omega 9, which, as I'm sure your HOA records, or lack thereof, will eventually confirm, encompasses the entirety of what you call Whispering Pines Lake, including the land upon which we are all currently standing. I held up the deed, its official stamps and seals clearly visible. A ripple of gasps went through the assembled members. Brenda's jaw, which had been set in a pugnacious line, literally dropped. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the deed to my face and back again. That's absurd. Forged. You can't just buy the lake, she sputtered, her voice a few octaves higher than usual. It's HOA property. It has always been HOA property. Actually, no, it hasn't, I stated, my voice ringing with the confidence of someone who had spent weeks verifying every single fact. It was originally owned by Pinnacle Homes, then went through a series of shell companies, defaulted on taxes, reverted to the county, and was subsequently purchased by Aquavest Holdings LLC, from whom I legally purchased it. I have all the documentation right here. I then produced the extensive chain of title research Miss Prophet Albright and I had compiled. You and your esteemed members club have been operating, charging fees, and restricting access to land you have never, ever legally owned. The color drained from Brenda Snodgrass's face, leaving her looking almost sickly pale beneath her salon tan and meticulously applied makeup. Gerald, her loyal board member, blustered. This is preposterous. The HOA has maintained this lake for years. That gives us rights. Maintaining something you don't own doesn't grant you ownership, Gerald, I said mildly. It might, however, make you liable for unauthorized alterations to private property. But that's a discussion for another time. Today, we're primarily discussing trespass, and with that, I presented her with the formal Notice of Trespass and Demand for Cessation of Unauthorized Use and Remediation of Damages, complete with the beautifully itemized $5 million invoice. President Snodgrass, I said, my voice taking on a harder edge, you have been fining residents, including myself, for $50 for allegedly using your lake. Well, this lake is now unequivocally mine. And this, I tapped the invoice, is my bill to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association for years of unauthorized use, illegal profiteering from your club on land you didn't own, and continued trespass on my property, including this very enjoyable, but very illegal, BBQ you are currently hosting. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant pop of the bouncy castle still on my land, and the chirping of oblivious birds. Brenda Snodgrass simply stared at the multi-million-dollar invoice as if it were a cobra poised to strike. Her carefully constructed world of pastel tracksuits and unquestioned authority was crumbling around her in real time, in front of her most ardent supporters. Some of the esteemed members were openly gaping. Others were exchanging horrified whispers. I saw Dave, the former board member, in the background, practically vibrating with barely suppressed glee. He gave me a discreet thumbs up. Brenda finally found her voice, though it was shaky. $5 million? You're insane. This is harassment. This is illegal. No, Brenda, I said, dropping the President Snodgrass honorific deliberately. What was illegal was your HOA extorting funds from residents for access to property you didn't control. What is illegal is your continued presence here, right now, on my land, without my permission. This BBQ is officially over. I am asking you, your board, and all your esteemed members to vacate my property immediately. Gerald stepped forward again, trying to regain some semblance of authority. Now see here, Miller. You can't just kick everyone out. This is a community event. It was an HOA event, Gerald, being held under false pretenses on private land. I countered. And yes, I can. It's my land. Every uninvited person here is trespassing. I looked around at the bewildered crowd. For those of you who were genuinely unaware of the situation, I apologize for the disruption. But the Whispering Pines HOA, under the leadership of Ms. Snodgrass, has been acting unlawfully. You have been paying exorbitant club fees for access to something they had no right to offer exclusively. A woman I recognized as one of Brenda's closest allies, always impeccably dressed and dripping in disapproval of everyone else, piped up. But the improvements! The HOA has spent so much money on this lakefront. On my lakefront, you mean? I corrected gently. And any unpermitted improvements might actually constitute damages, which we can also discuss. Right now, the primary issue is trespass. The daily rate for unauthorized commercial gatherings on my property is quite steep, as you can see from the invoice. Brenda finally crumpled, not literally, but her imperious posture deflated. She looked around wildly, as if seeking an escape route or a loophole. There was none. This will destroy the HOA, she whispered, aghast. We don't have that kind of money. Perhaps you should have considered that before building your little empire on sand, Brenda, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. As for the 5-0 fine you levied against me for fishing, consider it null and void. I pulled out her original fine letter, which I'd also brought, and with a small theatrical flourish, tore it into pieces, letting them flutter to the ground. The symbolism was not lost on the onlookers. The spell was broken. Some esteemed members started to look angry, not at me, but at Brenda. They'd been duped. They'd paid thousands for exclusivity. That was a sham. The murmurings grew louder, less confused, more accusatory. Is this true, Brenda? Did you know the HOA didn't own the lake? One man demanded. Brenda stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Her authority had vanished as quickly as morning mist on the newly christened Lake Miller. Her fuchsia tracksuit now seemed less a symbol of power and more a costume for a tragic comedy. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The annual Lake Club Members Appreciation BBQ disintegrated. People started packing up, casting furious or bewildered glances at a stunned Brenda Snodgrass. The caterers, seeing the writing on the wall, and perhaps fearing they wouldn't get paid, began to quietly dismantle their setup. Gary, from the hot dog stand, actually gave me a small, grateful nod. The news spread through Whispering Pines like wildfire. By evening, my phone was ringing off the hook with calls from astonished neighbors, most of them congratulatory, some just wanting to confirm the incredible rumor: Mark Miller bought the lake. The next few days were a whirlwind. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting, without Brenda initially, who was reportedly indisposed. They contacted their lawyer, who, after reviewing my documentation, which I gladly provided copies of, confirmed to them in no uncertain terms that their position was, to put it mildly, untenable. They did not own the lake. They were indeed trespassing. The $5 million invoice while legally aggressive, served its purpose. It got their absolute, undivided attention. It was a lever, a tool to force a complete capitulation and restructuring of their despotic regime. The HOA's lawyer quickly contacted Ms. Albright to open negotiations. Of course, I wasn't going to get $5 million. That was never the point. The point was to break Brenda's power and correct a gross injustice. We settled for a sum that covered my acquisition costs for the lake, my legal fees, and a modest amount for damages and past unauthorized use, enough to be painful for the HOA's budget and ensure they'd think twice about such overreach again, but not enough to bankrupt the entire association, which would harm everyone, myself included. More importantly, the non-monetary terms of our settlement were far-reaching. First, Brenda Snodgrass was to issue a formal, public apology to me and to all residents of Whispering Pines for the misrepresentations regarding lake ownership and access. Second, she was to resign immediately as HOA president and from the board. This was non-negotiable. Third, the Whispering Pines Lakefront Estates Esteemed Members Club was to be immediately and permanently disbanded, and any and all club fees collected under false pretenses over the past few years were to be audited and, where records allowed, refunded to the former members. This caused another wave of outrage among Brenda's cronies, but they had no choice. Fourth, the HOA had to formally acknowledge my ownership of the lake and agree to never again attempt to restrict access or impose rules regarding its use without my express written permission. Brenda's resignation came swiftly, a terse, face-saving email citing personal reasons. Good riddance. The apology was more grudging, read out by a humiliated interim president at the next HOA meeting, but it was public. The old board mostly dissolved, replaced by a new set of faces, many of whom had privately cheered me on. Dave, the former board member, even agreed to serve again, vowing to bring transparency. And the lake, Whispering Pines Lake, now legally my Whispering Pines Lake, I thought long and hard about what to do. I could have kept it private, my own personal kingdom, mirroring Brenda's tyranny. But that wasn't me. Instead, I worked with the new, chastened HOA board. We drafted a simple, clear, lake use agreement. The lake would be open to all residents of Whispering Pines Estates and their accompanied guests. Basic safety and ecological rules would apply. No motorized boats, except for my occasional electric trolling motor if I ever got around to fishing again. Catch and release for fishing, respect for wildlife. No dumping, no fees, no exclusive clubs. Just a beautiful community amenity, enjoyed responsibly by everyone, as it should have been from the start. I retained ownership, so if any future HOA board got any funny ideas, I still held the ultimate trump card. But the agreement was for 25 years, renewable, ensuring community access long-term. The change in the neighborhood was palpable. The atmosphere of fear and petty tyranny lifted. People started talking to each other more. The new HOA board focused on actual community improvement, not enforcing Brenda's ridiculous whims. My 5-0 fishing fine was long forgotten, overshadowed by the legend of the $5 million trespass invoice. I never did teach Leo to fish that first day, but a few weeks after everything settled, he and I went down to our lake. We cast our lines into the clear water. No fear of officious golf carts or ludicrous fines. Just a father and son enjoying a peaceful afternoon, and that, I thought, was worth every penny and every ounce of effort. So, that's the story of how I ended up buying the community lake to fight an HOA fine. Sometimes, when the system is rigged by bullies, you have to think outside the box, or in this case, buy the box, the lake, and everything in between. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my shoes, or if you've had your own crazy HOA battles. And if you see Brenda Snodgrass looking for a new gig, tell her I own a lake that could probably use some very, very distant landscaping. On second thought, maybe not. Thanks for listening.